with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
What's up, world? Welcome back to Black Liberation Media in episode 111 of Saturdays with Renee. I'm Jared Ball, happy to co-host with, of course, Renee Johnston. Please like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. All the links in the show description. Renee!
Jared! What's up,
What's
man?
going on?
You sound hoarse. Were you yelling at somebody? I just noticed.
No, I just... Oddly enough, I haven't talked a lot today, so I'm just getting everything together.
You know what I've been meaning to ask you? How did soccer turn out? Like the whole postseason.
Well,
stuff.
let me say it this way. I'm super proud of my daughter, both of them, of course, but in this case, my youngest, because she has handled it very well. She was the consummate teammate, hanging out with her friends at the banquet and all of that. But she and I actually one or more other seniors were not, I think, treated properly by the coach, and she did not get a lot of playing time, and they ended up losing. I forgot what level they got to just before the final. I guess it's the semifinal of the tournament of the state tournament, but they won county, they won regional, and then they lost just before going to the finals for the state. But she wasn't playing, and it was, so for me, it was painful, and it was, a lot of projected hostility from me. But she was perfect and handled it well. But the season's over, and she's already training in preparation to walk on to whatever university she ends up going to. And I just love her whole attitude and her mentality, and I'm super proud. So, but yes, that's where we are.
That's dope. Good for her. I wasn't sure if she was still going to try and do college level.
Oh yeah,
that's dope.
I mean, she's the daughter of a supreme hater, and so part of it is we're not going to let this dude be like this. Like, he's not going to end your career. It'll end on your terms, one way or another. So we're like, you got 9 or 10 months. You can train, get yourself back. She's never really gotten back to 100% health, and then walk on and get onto a team, and then play in college. And so like. That's where we are. So yeah, no, we're not letting this. Like they used to say, one monkey can't stop no show. You know what I'm saying?
I guess that's one way to put it. Definitely, yeah.
So, that's how it is. But yeah, how's everything over there? And Austin is here, by the way.
Oh, okay, cool. I figured he'd get here, and I wasn't gonna worry about it too much. As folks can probably tell, I am in transit somewhere, and so I'm hoping to be stable in a little bit. But in the interest of time, I will say that I am surviving as capitalisms, and then we'll just we'll leave it there because this is just where things are right now. But we do have a guest, and since Austin is here, I guess let's pull Austin up.
All right. So Austin Cole, Black Alliance for Peace, welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning, y'all. Good to see you, Jared. Good to hear you, Renee.
Thank you for coming. Everyone, we are this week kicking off a week of action. It is a international workings between, I think it's now like 30 35 orgs or something like that, that have joined forces to try and make sure that people understand what is going on in Venezuela, and to, see if there's any pressure that could be put upon this greedy ass government under which we live that seems to think that they could just do whatever they want everywhere else in the world. So Austin is here to give some more details and information, so we will let Austin take over. But if you could first, Austin, introduce yourself to the good people and let them know who you are, where you at, what you're doing, how you got here, and then we can talk about the Hands Off Venezuela campaign.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I'm glad to be here. I'm Austin Cole. I'm one of the national co-coordinators for the Black Alliance for Peace, based in Philadelphia. And I'm also one of the co-coordinators for BAP's Haiti Americas team. And so our Haiti Americas team launched with a bunch of other organizations around the region a campaign called the Zone of Peace campaign back in 2023. And so some of the work that we're doing now with, the war in Venezuela is related back to that campaign. And I am also a former high school athlete that came back from injury my senior year and walked on, Jared. So definitely, I did end my career on my terms, where I decided actually I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this academic thing instead. But I feel you were bringing me back there with your daughter. So much love and respect and to your daughter and to you.
And
no, right on. Thank you for that.
Austin doesn't even know that just put him on the list, because now we have to have this whole conversation about about your path that now I need to know. So you
one day.
You should expect an email.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anytime. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jared.
No, I was just going to invite you to go on and break down the week of action and anything else you need folks to know, and where we need folks to go.
Yeah. So this week of action, starting today till November 23rd, so till next Sunday, was called by, I think Renee mentioned over 30 organizations, mostly in North America, including Black Alliance for Peace. And the goal really, as people probably know, or at least as your listeners probably know, the U.S. has been on the aggressive war path for over the last 2 months. But even going back, we're almost 11 years after Barack Obama declared that Venezuela was a threat to national security and kind of started this new phase of aggression against Venezuela, which has lasted over a decade. But right now, the U.S. has been building up militarily in the Caribbean, strongly in Puerto Rico, encircling the Venezuelan coast. As many people have seen, they've been kind of drone striking fisher people off of the coast of the Caribbean and off of the coast of the Pacific, and really gearing up to what at first many people thought might be a bluff, but now really seems like they're intent on a hot war with Venezuela to overthrow the government in Venezuela. And so really what this week of action is to really mobilize people across the country and across the world, but particularly this hemisphere, to mobilize against this war-making effort, to mobilize against kind of the ways in which the U.S. has basically decided under Trump that they are going to kind of forego all of the previous, diplomatic niceties that, the Biden administration and previous administrations had done to try to overthrow Venezuela or other governments, and really just go straight back to this, kind of almost like Theodore Roosevelt takeover, Monroe Doctrine, takeover of the region. Right. And so I think that right now for the week of action, it really is to get folks out, to say that we won't accept this, right? That the war basically in Venezuela, and that the war that's being made back here at home or back here in the US, in our cities here, are connected. And the only way that we are going to be able to defeat this is by mass mobilization that goes into mass organization and resistance, right? So obviously mobilization, going out into the streets and, and building our forces against this war effort is not going to stop that war, right? But it is a step in building towards the type of organization that we need in order to oppose, militarization, in order to oppose this, downward spiral into war in this hemisphere. So we have different events that are happening all throughout the country, throughout the US, throughout Canada, and then also all throughout the region. So today in Philadelphia at 2 p.m. at City Hall, we'll be out there with a bunch of different organizations. And then if you go on the Black Alliance for Peace's website and you see the events, you can see events that are happening all throughout the country over the course of this week. And then if you go to the United Anti-War Coalition's webpage, UNAC, you can also see there that they have a broader the broader call for all different organizations all throughout the country. And then us with the Zone of Peace campaign and our US NATO Out of Our Americas network, you can see there different events that are happening throughout the hemisphere, right? So we have a bunch of folks in the Dominican Republic who have a ton of different events that are happening all throughout the week in different forms of events. We have folks in Mexico, folks in Ecuador, in Puerto Rico, all throughout the region. So really the goal is to do that, to get out into the streets, to have popular education as well. And then also to coordinate that, right? So to not just have a bunch of different random things happening, but to see this all as a coordinated effort that we can come together and mobilize and organize. And yeah, as Jared's showing right now, you can see some of the events that are on that side. And if you click on the events page, then those events, all the different events that are upcoming will show up.
Thank you. Can you say a little more, because this is something that we harp on regularly, about the interconnection, like when you say the war abroad is connected to the war here that is happening within our cities. Can you just a little more about what that means, like in a real sense, for people who don't come here every Saturday to listen to us talk about how it's all connected?
Yeah, so there's a few different dimensions to it, but I'll try not to go too long. So one of the major aspects of BAP's work in our central campaign, which is called No Compromise, No Retreat, Defeat the War on Africans, Black people in the US and abroad, is understanding programs like the 1033 program, which allows, local police local police departments to actually just transfer equipment from the Pentagon, from the Department of Defense. And if you look at, how those transfers have transpired over time, as the US, pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan, then the equipment that was being used there is being transferred to local police departments, right? So you see the tanks, you see the tear gas, all the other different types of equipment that were in Ferguson, that are in, that were used all throughout our cities through 2020 and 2021 and continue to be utilized, on a daily basis. Those are made for war, right? But then when the war isn't happening, they are brought back home, right? So the war profiteers, right, the defense manufacturers or defense contractors, they're going to sell their equipment somewhere, right? So there's one part of it that is really concrete about, this equipment, these war making efforts are literally coming back into our communities, right? Then there's another aspect which I think is, has been happening for a long time in terms of the militarization and in particular like counterinsurgency or counterintelligence. And I see you all are going to be talking with Lara Sheehi. So that's something that, you know, she knows much more about than I do. But I think for our purposes in understanding this today is that the methods of counterinsurgency, the methods of counterintelligence, of destroying movements, of destroying community control, of destroying popular democracy or attempts at popular democracy in this country are tested on people abroad. And that has been happening for a long time, right? That happened during the Korean War, during the Vietnam War, and the tactics that were utilized there were brought back here to more effectively dismantle movements here in the US, right? And so the ways that those things have been developed, it is a process of war making, and war is beneficial to the imperialist or the capitalist powers. And so wherever they can make war to extract, you know, value, to test their devices, to test their methods. We've seen that in Palestine with the genocide in Palestine as well, and Zionist intelligence apparatus and Zionist equipment that is utilized there, and surveillance equipment is literally already being utilized in public housing in the US, right? Is literally already being utilized by police forces or police departments here in the US. And so, and that's been happening, right? But it's only happening at a more accelerated rate. So the way that we can't sort of convince ourselves that war is happening to some people over there and that it will not come back to us, or that it is not already happening, because it's a two-way relationship as well, right? The way that, you know, war has been visited on African people and Black people in this country, you know, throughout enslavement, during Reconstruction and the destruction of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, you know, many of those methods were utilized in places like South Africa, right? In places like historic Palestine, right? In Gaza. And so understanding that is really critical. But then there's also a really important moment now that is specific to the Americas and specific to Venezuela, where the US wants to destroy any alternatives to the capitalist imperialist mode of operating economic production, political understanding, right, or political arrangements and governance, as well as kind of social organization, right? And what, you know, Venezuela, what Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, all of these countries represent is an alternative way of being, right? An alternative way of operating society. And they show an example that actually a different way is possible. And that is more dangerous to the US, to the entire imperialist order, than all the oil that Venezuela has, right? Yes, they want Venezuela's oil, but they also want to destroy any hope of something different for African people, for all colonized people, for working class people in this country and throughout the world, right? And so for us, understanding that war, understanding the purpose of the war on Venezuela and on this hemisphere is to really destroy those alternatives in this hemisphere, so that there is no model, there is no alternative that people here can look to and say, we can actually do something different, and we're willing to fight for something different. And to lock down this hemisphere as you know, China has influence throughout the rest of the globe, as countries in Africa are rising up against French, neocolonialism and U.S. neocolonialism, and folks throughout, as I already mentioned in Palestine and in West Asia, that folks are rejecting Zionism and rejecting the normalization of that. The U.S. is trying to shore up the Americas as a fortress, right? As I mentioned, they're trying to return to the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, to say this entire hemisphere is ours. We completely control it, and there will be no alternative way of living right here besides domination and control. So just to say that, I think it's multifaceted, but most importantly right now, why we need to fight against this is to actually have the capacity, or build towards the capacity, to have self-determination, right? To believe that we can actually develop ways of being, ways of living, where our communities can be in control of our destiny, because this country has never wanted that for African people, for Black people, right? Has never wanted that for working class people. And so trying to stamp that out of Venezuela is also trying to strike a blow against any hope of that for us inside the confines of this country as well.
Yeah, no, right on. Thank you for that. No, go ahead, Renee.
No, I was just gonna say I appreciate that breakdown. It is nothing short of the clarity that I would have expected you to provide. So I appreciate it. And then, is there anything else that you want to cover or share before we let you go? Because I appreciate your time, and I know I think you're also supposed to be on another call, as I'm supposed to be on right now. So.
There's always something, right? No, I'll just leave with just, again, folks, to look out for the week of action, things happening in your city. Even if something's not happening in your city, right, that's an invitation for you to take that up, right? Part of mobilizing and organizing is also building our consciousness to act and to understand that we can act and we can find other people who we can act collectively with towards this longer generational struggle. And for folks to check out the Zone of Peace campaign and U.S. NATO Out of Our Americas network, really that work and the goal of that effort is to build an America's wide consciousness, because we understand that our fates are interconnected, right? We understand that, African people who are in South America, in the Caribbean, and in the United States and North America, right, are part of, the broader African world, and that our and as African or Black, working class peoples, we have to be united, and we have to coordinate, with other folks who are colonized, other working class people, other communities throughout this hemisphere and throughout the world. So really, that U.S. NATO Out of Our Americas network is part of that effort to build that from the bottom up grassroots coordination, to build that struggle that can be a generational struggle, and to construct a real zone of peace in our Americas. So that's all I got. Appreciate y'all so much for the time. And yeah, U.S. and NATO Out of Our Americas, and we need to make our Americas a zone of peace.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. This was dope. This was dope. And obviously, anytime.
Peace.
Peace, peace, peace. BlackAllianceForPeace.com for more.
There you go. There you go.
And
there's actually a lot of stuff happening, and so I really encourage people to kind of follow the links and try and see if there's something near you. There's also a bunch of online events that are just educational to learn more about how all of these things are working, and the absolute wildness of as the empire is dying, we're just gonna attack everybody and see how much we can hold on to. It's totally out of control. But I appreciate everybody. Are we good on our other guests?
Our guests are here, and yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm not ready, but I'm ready. So
let's do it. Let's not keep the people waiting.
So yeah, big welcome. Go ahead. Yeah.
I am so excited to have this conversation. I can't even tell y'all. So so first of all, Avgi, am I pronouncing the first name properly?
Very, very close. It's Avgi. It's a hard name. It's Avgi.
Avgi. Okay.
It's like a Y sound. It's a little deceptive with how it's spelled.
Okay. And I'm not even going to torture the last name, so we're going to leave that where it is. This is one of those moments where I'm going to be Jared, and I'm not even going to try, because I have not taken the time to fight myself to force learning the appropriate approach. But if we can start with intros, and as we typically do here, we like to let our guests introduce themselves. And so, Lara, why don't you start, and then you can popcorn it, and then we can get into the conversation.
Sure. Thanks for having me on again. And folks, a shout out to Austin, who is just here in Black Lions for Peace. Comrades, follow them, follow their work, show up for them. They've been doing this work for a long time. So I really appreciate it. And I was here listening and just loving all the connections that were made. Like Renee, like you said, like you all do this work, you and Jared, every single week, but it's so nice to have somebody just break it down and distill it and be like, here are the connecting dots and why we need to be paying attention to it. So I'm Lara. I'm a psychoanalytic clinician, and I'm interested in psychic militancy in the ways that we sustain ourselves against these intrusions that Austin was talking about, right? All the ways in which our interior world is meant to be intruded upon and rewired and have, I love what he said about destroying revolutionary futures, like the possibilities of what is to come is foreclosed upon. And the last time I was here, I mentioned to Renee Avgi's work, right? And that's why she's here. So Exigent Sadism, folks, this has changed our field. It has revolutionized the way we talk about things. She won't say that herself, but I can. I feel so indebted to her about thinking through political violence, thinking through the way that we reconfigure relationships and not get seduced into giving up so much. And I will have her explain that more in our conversations, but I'm so excited. She's one of my dearest comrades and besties. So to be online together is wonderful. And then with you two, it's a dream. Avgi, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you. I love the work you're doing. I think it's always very important, but it's critical and life-saving right now and life-expanding. I'm super excited to be in conversation with you. To Lara, I will say the things that she will not say about herself. She's really changed the field of psychoanalysis and has inspired so many people to be thinking politically in a field that has, through its training and through how it disciplines thinking, does not just encourage us, but forces us to think without politics, and makes a big problem thinking politically. And Lara has really changed that in the field. So I'm very grateful to have learned from you, Lara, and to be in this conversation with you. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Renee, for inviting me. I'm super excited to talk about sadism.
Can I just say very quickly, first of all, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be talking with you again, Lara. And I was feverishly trying to catch up a little bit to your work these last couple of days. And all I found myself doing a lot is going like this, but I don't pretend to understand what I was reading or listening to. I was just like that. It was, again, just a vibe, but I was like, all of it was going over my head. I got some notes and some questions, but I don't pretend at all to understand. I just feel like you're right. And I want to encourage other people to really engage your work. And I'm definitely going to get back to both of yours. So anyway, welcome. Thank you for that. And Renee, thanks again for putting this together. And I'll
look, this was nothing but me in a Signal chat, literally talking shit with Lara, and like I don't even remember what I was complaining about. And Lara was like, there's a term for that, right? And I was like, is there a term for this? And so that's literally how this started. Was me complaining about how shitty people are, and that my decision has been fuck everybody. Like, that's been my decision. If you cannot simply accept some very, very, like, what I consider to be low bar expectations for human beings to accept other people's humanity, that's a low fucking bar. Like, it's just low. And so once we started this conversation, I was very excited. And Avi, I appreciate you sent me a copy of your book, and I appreciate it. I read the Exigent Sadism chapter, and I started some of the other chapters just so I could like kind of pull a lot of it together. And I mean, this is just, there's so much here, people. There's so much here. But can we start with the definition of exigent sadism so that people, or maybe maybe start with the redefining of sadism, because I think people, as most people do, when they see the word, they're like, wait a minute, what? And so maybe if we start there and then expand to what you're talking about, and then we can go from there.
Before we pop it to Avgi, can I just, Renee, let me sort of correct the record here. It was you, quote unquote, complaining, but it wasn't complaint. You were saying you refuse to bend to the will of usually liberals or white people who demand that you act a certain way for them to receive you. And I was like, do I have the person for you? And do I have the concept for you? So take it over, Avgi.
I mean, now that you say the bending of the will, like I totally see the instant connection. And, you know, I'm thinking about what you were saying, Jared, what it's like to read in a field that may not be necessarily the field that one is in. But we still sense when the politics and the and to use Lara's term, where the militancy of the work resonates with us. So following all the theoretical moves is not necessarily always the point. This is like more technical work that may or not be relevant in some contexts or even useful. But sometimes like we read something and it just resonates. And I just wanted to say something to that, because I think that that's a really important aspect of the psychological experience of that and of how ideas grab us. So Renee, I'm so excited that you're already thinking with sadism, even if you were not necessarily calling it that. Here's what I would say. So historically speaking, you know, the term sadism has had many meanings, and, you know, it comes to us from the Marquis de Sade, who was a French aristocrat, who actually wrote a lot. He was incarcerated for most of his life, mainly for his sexual, like I'm going to put this in quote, deviant sexual behaviors. And he was incarcerated for most of his life. And while he was incarcerated, he started writing a lot of stuff that today might look very much anarchic, kind of like very anarchist. Critiques of the state, critiques of the power of the church. He's writing around the time of the French Revolution. So he has a lot to say about aristocracy and class as theft. So he writes this text, but what becomes most known about him and what survives, especially around World War II, the entire canon that he has given us begins to get read through how in the camps, violence gets organized and becomes methodically structured against the elimination of Jewish life. And in the camps, what you see is a lot of literature starts coming out around the Holocaust that begins to read Sade not as a theoretical pioneer or a philosophical or political theorist who has pioneering work, or somebody who is writing with different forms of sexuality. He actually begins to get read. It gives us the way, the Holocaust reading of Sade gives us the way in which Sade becomes canonized. So today, when you say that somebody is sadistic, or when you say that something is sadistic, we usually mean that somebody is takes pleasure out of torturing people, takes pleasure out of harming people. But this is only one version of how we might understand sadism. And what I try to do in my work is actually lift up some of the other meanings that are more aligned with the ways in which Sade and many, many other people through him, after him, write about the excitement of thinking in the libidinal life, the erotics of resistance, the erotics of pushing back against how we're told we're expected to think or act or how to organize ourselves, that this also comes not just with ethics, but it also, and with justice, it also comes with a willingness to engage in a certain kind of violence. And when I talk about violence, I think we have to qualify violence here, and how violence is a word that's used by the state, how violence is put in discourses, like from very early on in social contract theory, violence is the thing that the state can legally do and that citizens cannot legally engage in, right? So this is how definitionally decolonial struggle, anti-colonial resistance, resistance kind of like by all means necessary gets illegalized, but also thrown out of how we might think of what is a fair way to fight back. So you begin to see these types of discourses dividing. So on the one hand, you have good resistance, and on the other hand, you have bad resistance, and violence becomes a property of the state. And a lot of people on the left develop a very an allergy, if not a difficulty, thinking about how violence and aggression actually has to be part of how we think revolution and how we think outside the modes in which we've been disciplined to understand pushback as running through what the state will allow us to do. But in order to be able to think that way, we have to be willing to take some risks, which is to think risks that make us vulnerable in our conversations, risks that sometimes also require us to rethink our own relationships to the state and with each other. So I'll leave it at that. There's so much more to say, but this is just an opening move.
No, thank you for that, and I definitely appreciate your first point about the feeling and finding the militancy, even where I don't fully follow we might not follow every word of the argument. But no, that's great. Laura,
Well,
did you
Jared,
want to? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead,
No,
Renee. Sorry.
just real
No.
quick. Since you said you had questions also, since normally I am the one with the 8 pages of questions, I think since you have questions, you should ask your questions first, because I had more time to dig in and I watched, I think, probably more. And, you know, my study and my degree is in counseling and psychology. So it might have been for me a little easier to follow, which y'all, just so we're clear, like this never ever happens where the path that we're down is the one that I studied. so you know, Lara, if you have something to add, we do that first. But I think, Jared, we should start with your questions, because it may be that your questions are more reflective of what the audience is thinking about than the things that I kind of have in mind that I wanted to share.
Sure, but yeah, Lara, go ahead.
I just want to sort of say and hone in. I think this is where Avgi and our work does come together in certain ways, certainly around thinking through revolutionary violence, the need for that. What are the psychic ways that we can stay ourselves against this, and keeping track of all the ways that we get disciplined out of that, right? This works in many ways, like the function of politeness, the function of being socialized. This is the conversations Renee and I were having about all the ways in which you're seduced into thinking that there are certain modes of behavior that are going to protect you from violence of the state, right? Like if I just did this, or relationally, for example. Now, certainly I had experience thinking through this as an immigrant, as a racialized person coming into the United States, learning the racial codes of the United States and realizing, I think we talked about this last time, realizing, oh shit, whether or not I say anything, I'm experienced a particular way because of my politics. It's my politics. Like if I were to vacate my militancy, everybody would be happy. Everybody wants a fucking Lebanese person that has no politics, right? That a liberal Lebanese person, everybody, I can make tabbouleh and fattoush and hummus and everybody would be happy. But the second you come onto the scene and refuse to bend and continue in your militant path, that's the place where people have problems and shit starts to break down. So Avgi's work about like, what is the process by which we stay ourselves against all these seductions, right? I think Avgi is also working on staying away from repair and all these ways in which we are invited into relationally shifting or softening ourselves or doing all that. And for me, I'm thinking about all the political consequences of that. And my book that's coming out really talks about like, what are the actual political consequences that happen about our revolutionary futures when we actually buy in to this disciplining process. And of course, I love that, Avgi, you said an allergy against violence. And this is the sort of thing, it's like, how do we equip ourselves? I've used the word inoculate before. You said allergy to violence. And I'm saying, how do we inoculate ourselves against these invitations, against these seductions, against these ways that we are actually meant to think, that behaving in a certain way is going to be the fix for that, right? And this is really something for our, I'm not talking about liberals, like fuck liberals. I'm talking about our revolutionary leftist politics and thinking through. And the last thing I'll say, and then Jared, I really want to hear your questions too, is the way that affect, like the psycho-political affective is mobilized in these particular ways, right? So the allergy against violence, what happens psychically and affectively that stops us in our tracks, that makes us hesitate, that makes us, veer off, that allows us to join their theater, as Dylan Rodriguez would say. There's an entire theater of lexical warfare, those are his words, that is mobilized against us. And there are ways in which, even when we're politically on point, we find ourselves in these positions where we are bending rather than, here, I'll reach to Fanon, is make the colonizer concede. It's the concession has to come from them, not from us. But there are all these sorts of ways in which we are made to give up concessions, cede space, compromises, all these sorts. So like, that's what I'm here for. I want that conversation too.
Yeah. Okay. So where my questions are initially coming from are from the video you all sent us, where both of you were in a panel with some other colleagues, and there was, I'm using the phrase rapid fire because that's how I felt receiving the ideas as they were just, and I was just like, wow. So every once in a while I would just pick up on what I felt was a theme and write it down. And you actually, both of you said things that were in a positive way jarring. So, but if for my sake and for maybe that of the audience, could you come back and say a little bit more about, so for instance, at one point, I thought one of your colleagues was saying respectfully that they disagreed with the use of the term sadism because of how it was perceived in popular. You spoke a little bit to that, but if you could come back and say a little bit more about just more about how you're using the term and deploying it. And then what you also mean by exigency, if you could just add just more, just so, and then that'll help for the other few questions I have, and then I'll turn it over to Renee and the experts.
Okay, those are great questions. So we have the usual way in which sadism is understood as cruelty, as like superfluous violence that is just about pleasure. And then we have the BDSM variant of sadism, where two people agree to come together and do BDSM. One is the sadist and one is the masochist. And I put this in quotes because another way that we have to think about sadism is an as if, almost mimetic form of sadism, where somebody agrees to act as if they are sadistic with somebody who wants that for for reasons of sexual pleasure or sexual enjoyment. And I call this sensible sadism because it's kind of fake. It's as if it's a put on version where both people agree that somebody will assume a role. But exigent sadism is different from both destructive sadism and sensible sadism, in that it is, to go back to Renee's question, it's not about exercising one's will on another person. It's not about trying to force another person to do something. It's about being unwilling to being pulled into what the other person wants you to do, and unwilling to obey the mandates, the social mandates, the state mandates around which these relationships are set up. So in many ways, exigent sadism is also a stance of refusal. It is exigent by the word exigent. I'm talking about something which is unrelenting. This is where my work on sadism and Lara's work on militancy kind of like come together. And to have an exigently sadistic stand, one has to be willing to lose things. One has to be willing to give up relationships, to give up connections, to give up access, to give up well-won possibilities for expansion, for opportunity, for work. One has to be willing to risk all of those things. So what does it mean to hold our friends, our family, our comrades accountable, and to be unwilling to preserve a relationship no matter what the other person brings into the conversation? What does it mean to have to be, for families who are celebrating a genocide in a couple of weeks, to come together around the table and agree to not have difficult conversations? What does it mean to preserve those relationships at any cost? And this is where Lara was also mentioning earlier, my work on kind of like both Lara and Stephen Sheehi and I are interested in the work that repair does, especially in therapeutic practices, which to some degree, the idea that you should always be able to repair with those around you is based on the notion that you should be, at the end of the day, willing to sacrifice yourself and willing to sacrifice your ideals and willing to sacrifice what you think is just in order to make sure that you stay in relation to somebody. So there's something really harsh about exigent sadism in the sense that it will cost the sadist something. There's no sadism without cost. And exigent sadism is also about what it costs us. I think we also gain in the course of that because we gain new connections and new possibilities come about with every refusal to be drawn into what Lara calls being kind of like psychic bending. With every such refusal, other possibilities open up, but we also have to lose. And from a personal perspective, not personal me, but from a subjective perspective, those losses are not always easy. Like to have to take distance from somebody you love, or to come to recognize that the field that you so much love, you're going to have to give up, that it is corrupt. To have to break relationships or call people to account. That also involves a vulnerability for the sadist herself, for the exigent sadist. And that's a kind of vulnerability that I think we need to be able to talk about if we are going to be creating environments that can sustain the intensity and the danger that comes and the possibility that opens up with exigent sadism. And for me, this also has to do with consent. Consent is a big issue here in the sense that we enter societies, the consent of the governed is to basically give up your weapons so that the state protects you, right? So to some degree, to a large degree, I would say, an exigently sadistic stand is also to withdraw one's consent from the state. It's to withdraw one's consent to how you have been told you're supposed to be governed. And that creates other alliances and other coalitions, but it also creates a certain kind of loneliness. It can also create a certain kind of, you have to start making things up and create things with others that are not in the books, that are not in textbooks, that are not in workshops. You really have to go out on a limb. And those are huge risks to take, but important ones.
Thank you. Lara, let me bring you in by asking something about something you said, because, well, just speaking of vulnerability, these last couple of days, I've admittedly felt more vulnerable in two moments than I have in a long time. And one was doing this interview with some comrades out west about this new film they've made that I want to continue to encourage everybody to see, called Crushing Wheelchairs. We have to find ways to get this seen, which overlaps everything from settler colonialism to capitalism to in this one particular scene that I'm thinking of that was very emotionally breaking, of them bulldozing homeless people's wheelchairs. to remove them from these encampments, so-called, or whatever. And I thought immediately, when we talked about this, of the bulldozing of Palestinian homes, and the connections. And then Lara, you said something, and I want to be intentionally provocative here because I wrote it down, because I felt a similar emotional break when you talked about the story of smuggled sperm. And drew all these connections about disability justice, abolitionism, in the context of this discussion of exigent sadism. So could you, maybe by recounting that story, and all warnings or whatever, because to me, I'm finding it now, like it's just I don't know why I don't know why certain things hit differently than other things, but that one was just so, yeah. And then I'm just inviting you to say anything else about all of that. Forgive me for not having a better framed question, but
to the contrary.
yeah.
I really appreciate, I mean, this is where we're in the realm of affect. And I think this is, and affect, in as much as I want to talk about it, not just like affect as in feelings, but affect also in the way that we are disciplined out. And these particular, so Avgi's sort of call to us, like, we need to be able to have these conversations. And Jared, you being able to say, like, this shit hits. And when it hits, it also can feel destabilizing to us and make it difficult for us to think through things. And that the practice of doing that, for me, is a political project. It's a political project because it needs to be a willful one. And I'm using here Sarah Ahmad's idea about willfulness. Like, there's nothing about this that is easy. It is about building up a stamina. It is about building up a muscle that we can continuously practice. Doing that with comrades like this in a public facing way is one way we do that. So I feel so touched that you can bring those moments, and you're allowing us to kind of use it as a way to go further into this. And for me, I love this association that you're making with both these moments that sort of allow us to see, in my mind, when I hear you connect these two things, right? The sort of bulldozing of unhoused folks' place of living, right? That helps us also reattune to the condition that would create the reason that people needed to set up an encampment, right? Like, that often we are made to misattune from that and go to the place of the state violence. Of course, we need to do that, but let's think about the condition that created that to begin with. And then the double violence and double sort of invitation into lack of dignity that comes with then bulldozing, right? The spectacle of all of this. And of course, who's at the receiving end of that? Who's under the boot of that? And then the smuggling the sperm, Walid Daqqa, who's a revolutionary political prisoner who died in Zionist prisons, whose body is still being held, which is a practice that the Zionist settler state continues to do. They hold bodies of deceased political prisoners and do not release them to their families. Talk about, owning a monopoly on violence, like Avgi was saying. This, the connection I'm making here around what Avgi was talking about, sadism, about sort of a refusal of the consent of how to be governed in a particular way. Walid Daqqa's story is like that. So during incarceration, what he did was smuggle out sperm to be able to have a child with his wife who was on the outside. And the child is Milad. Her name is that. And she, I got to see them at the People's Conference for Palestine a couple of years ago. And just seeing her being present, first of all, his wife, Sanaa, who in and of herself is a force to reckon with, right? A journalist, a writer, a political militant. People might remember that she was also kidnapped by the settler state earlier this year and held. Thankfully, she was released. But this family has been under the boot and pressure of the Zionist state. And the reason why I think Walid Daqqa is so central in this is that, and his writing says this, he has the writing called Syrian Consciousness, and he talks about the purpose of the Zionist settler states machinery of incarceration is to be able to sear consciousness such that people actually lose sight of themselves, lose sight of Palestine, going back to Austin's idea at the beginning about losing sight of any possibilities beyond that. And his practice of writing, revolutionary writing that included the psychological, he tracks the methods of what they do to him, but also he talked about what are the ways in which I can divest from their intention to sear my consciousness. And him smuggling out sperm is one revolutionary way to continue to create life. This is the inventing new ways that I think Avgi was talking about. Like, in what universe would we have thought through? This is one way to not only fortify life, but to defy. This is the refusal. This is the defiance to say, you think that holding me here is going to stop me from being connected to Palestine and to the future of Palestine. I'm going to smuggle out sperm and create life. Exist, but that Palestine and the hope of return and my existence in this world as Walid Daqqa is going to continue in my daughter, right? For me, those are so powerful in terms of mapping out for us, again, when we don't succumb to the foreclosures that are put upon us, that are shoved down our throats, that make us be fixed in a certain place, and only the possibilities that are dictated by state violence, unwrenching ourselves from that and owning our revolutionary futures and possibilities through this is for me such a great example of this, right? And that's why I wanted to bring it up in that talk that you're referencing, because he was such a, Avgi talks about sort of rearranging the way that a relationship proceeds. I'm paraphrasing here, right? And for me also the question is very importantly how it does not proceed.
If I may jump in here for a second, I'm thinking also about kind of like how you started out your question, Jared, with talking about these images and the way in which we are encouraged, especially in feel-good cultures or in the ways in which people are told, you don't have to pressure yourself, you don't have to see things that upset you too much, that in some way there is an ethical requirement to look at these images and to engage with them, even as they may make you feel uncomfortable, even as they make you feel anxious or get nightmares. So I remember recently I was at a conference and we were talking about these images that are coming out of Gaza, and the ways in which people in the audience were saying, well, I have a child at home. I don't want to have to see these images. I don't want to see children beheaded or mutilated because it makes me worry too much about my child. I mean, their child who is in New York, kind of like safe and kind of like nothing materially, and the material aspect of this is really important. There's nothing to worry about. And yet the protectionism around not feeling distressed, not feeling upset, not feeling anxious becomes so prioritized over what is really on the table. So for me, the act of looking and not turning away is an ethical political requirement. And it requires, if you're going to do it, especially if you're upset, a certain kind of bending of your will. Like if your impulse is to look away, the ethical requirement is, this might also be the willfulness that you were talking about earlier, Lara, talking about Ahmed. It's the willfulness to bend your own impulse to not do the thing that might actually dysregulate you or upset. So much of exigent sadism is also about how committed we have become and how we are reared on cultures, especially in imperial life, especially in settler colonial life, reared on cultures that tell us that it's okay to not want to be upset with something that's happening, which is a form of abandonment. It's a form of disconnecting ourselves from the struggle that is going on in parts of the world that we imagine might not affect us here. And I'm saying this also as somebody who comes from Cyprus, which is a small country in the Mediterranean, which is under occupation, ongoing occupation, and that nobody thinks about. So all of these disconnects, the way in which these struggles are connected, but we're not taught what we need to know to make the connections, to see how these forces all work in unison, is very connected with not looking at this, not getting distressed, not looking at these images. I mean, I'm thinking of how we've even been told that looking at these images, and I think that this is what I might think of as a form of counterinsurgency, that looking at these images is just trauma porn. That being engaged with these images is just a way of getting off in some way, sexually or not, or intellectually, or with watching people suffer. This might be what we might think of as destructive sadism, that it would be sadistic to engage with these images. So we are even given ways of thinking that would peer us away from any impulse or interest on our own end to counter the parts of ourselves that don't want to look, right? So that is why, for me, this is such an ethical question, not just how do we get access to the kinds of images that you were talking about, Jared, but also how do we bend our will to look and to sit with the affects that come with looking and take them seriously.
No, I appreciate all of that, especially after your last two comments. I've come to think that all the claims that we shouldn't look at the images is meant to liberalize us, and because it's pretty clear, especially for anyone, but especially for us, we who are parents, to look at those images. The first thing you think of, what if that were me and mine? And then what does that feel? What are the next set of feelings? And that's where the liberals don't want us to be, because I know.
Yes.
And you know, so that's so at some point maybe we can come back to and maybe Renee, you'll bring it up, but Lara, you had said something in that talk about disappearance and presence, and that I, just the way I think was taking me too long. I struggle keeping up with all of that, but it was fascinating. And something about disappearing Arabs as some sort of defense mechanism for anti-Semitism or something like so. But the one sort of big question that I did want to make sure that I get to ask is that I kept thinking of in listening to that panel, is what would be the direct relationship or response from exigent sadism to the very intentional and intentionally constructed psychological warfare environment in which we all must suffer? Yeah, I'll just leave it. If you could both say something about that, that'd be great.
Avgi, you can start, since both of us spend our time reading counterinsurgency.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the exigently sadistic response to that is to not look away, to refuse to participate in the disappearance of people by disappearing the fact of the disappearance, and to actually keep talking about it and to keep generating conversation about it. But the other and most important thing, which also has to do with the ways in which exigent sadism is also a risk for the sadist, as I was saying, is not to be so frightened by these exorbitant demonstrations of state power, such that we become silent about them. One of the intents of these kinds of moves is to show us that everybody's vulnerable, that it could come to you. I mean, one of the reasons why, so we see some of the people who have been disappeared are people who have been kind of like writing a lot, or have been very kind of like having a lot of well-known activism around Palestine. But we also see somebody who wrote an op-ed in their small college, a Turkish woman, a Turkish student who is being picked up by ICE. And I think that the purpose of somebody like that being picked up by ICE is to show that there is not by ICE, I'm sorry, picked up by the state about like on false accusations of anti-Semitism, is to show us that it could come for anyone, it could come for you, and therefore to frighten us into not speaking up. And in order to keep speaking up, you have to step into that knowing that you're putting something of yours at risk, right? That you're putting, and especially like say if you have a family, or if you're undocumented, or if you are a person of color, or if you're queer, all of these vulnerabilities are very unevenly distributed. And you are vulnerable to the state and to surveillance and capture in very different ways. So in some way, which I think is very important for us to be thinking about, because revolution doesn't usually come from majoritarian subjects, it comes from subjects that are already in some precarious relationship to the state. Picking up somebody like that Turkish student who is just writing an op-ed for a college newspaper is a way of saying everybody who's vulnerable should start guarding themselves. Everybody who is more exposed to state violence should start guarding themselves. And that is a tremendously dangerous thing for us to go by. It's a very dangerous thing I can understand people who feel scared and who stop speaking up. Like I definitely see where that's coming from. But it is also a very effective counterinsurgency tactic. And I'm using the word counterinsurgency here in the way that Dylan Rodriguez talks about it, as a way of cutting off the possibilities of resistance. Again, here through some rhetoric or inciting the fear or inciting the danger. And then that can get taken up in liberal circles with people saying, well, you can't really expect minorities to do that. When in fact, it's only minorities. For the majority, it's minorities who are pushing back, right? So to take out minorities from this conversation is actually to kneecap any possibility of resistance and any possibility of revolutionary action.
And it's a form of paternalism, right? It's like colonial paternalism also that completely erases the histories of the struggles that are happening, whether or not liberals decide that they're okay with that, or it's legible to them, or any one of these things, right? I think we can look at the ways in which these, what we might call mundane violences. I mean, we always talk about the ways in which there are people in the world, certainly in the global South, but in the context of this settler colony as well, that are always living in parallel universes. So we're in a moment of inflection in which this becomes on center stage. And yet we can think about indigenous folks in the settler colony, Black folks in the settler colony, like Austin was talking about before, migrants in the settler colony who have never been able to not think about the ways in which they have to resist state violence, state surveillance, and the crushing effect of being, under the boot and in precarious positions all the time. For us to engage in this, Avgi, what you're saying, in this idea of like protecting ourselves, no one's saying not doing that in ways in which we see that, for example, in the community mobilization against ICE raids. That is a different form of that. And I think that has been happening for decades without it being on the radar for many people, where communities take care of each other and understand all the pressures coming down from the violence of the state. But to say that somehow we can come out of that, I think is also misreading what it means to truly be locked in and understand what state violence looks like on a consistent basis, right? And that's, I think, part of to your point, Jared, about presence. What I was trying to I think a lot about what does it mean to remain present, not just psychically present, but to refuse to be disappeared, right? And to speak back to that. I mean, I learned from indigenous scholars around that, where the entire narrative about indigeneity and sort of the way that settler colonialism can continue in its violence is selling the narrative that indigenous people are no longer present. And then psychically, we just go along with this. Oh, yes, this is a historical fact, rather than indigenous folks are still here resisting every single day not to live under settler colonialism. Glenn Coulthard has a beautiful concept called disciplined resentment, like engaging in disciplined resentment with the state so that you never forget that everything ends up being a compromise through bids of legibility, because settler colonialism as a condition demands that we disappear. Right? Demands that we disappear literally by like stealing people. And we can think about the racial resonance of that in the context of the settler colony of the United States or the settler colony of the Zionist entity, but also disappear and like shrink ourselves. This is what started a conversation with Renee. All the demands to shrink ourselves. And that really came into the forefront when you were talking about the presence of like disappearing the Arab as a fix to anti-Semitism. Some of the things that were happening to me when the Zionist campaign, started against me very much brought home about what does it mean for me to hold the line. And here I'm borrowing from Malcolm's idea about being extremist, where he, in Paris, when he has this talk, and he's just like, our people have been, I'm paraphrasing here, our people have been subjected to extreme conditions, and thinking that, what's it called? Medicine that's of just a tepid kind can fix that condition, right? This is the extremist, us holding an extremist position of presence, like sometimes our literal presence of not being seduced into thinking that this is going to be the fix. For me to be ousted from psychological associations, for my talks to be canceled, for people to make sure that I don't get jobs, whatever the case is, the fantasy is that, quote unquote, if the individual Lara is gone, we fix anti-Semitism. Fuck that shit, right? And not only is that bullshit, but it also is playing into the settler fantasy that somehow the Arab is responsible for the condition of anti-Semitism. Going back to that and tracing that logic, naming, I think this is what Avgi was saying, was like making it known, because abusive power want to work seamlessly, just like ideology is meant to work seamlessly such that we can't trace it anymore. Making it known, externalizing it, tracking it. I'm not advocating, and I know Avgi's not advocating for this either, of this sort of new age manifest, like someone we're going to manifest our ways out of these material conditions. Absolutely not. But one thing we're going to do is make sure that this shit can't happen on our watch without antagonism, right? Without the antagonism that is needed to not allow these systems to be able to act innocently and not be able to just settle within ourselves as though that is a normative ask. Like me disappearing is a normative ask that's going to fix anything for anybody else. I think that is a worthy political project, but it takes practice. That's why it's a political practice, just like I understand exigent sadism as a daily political practice that we have to engage in.
Thank you both very much. Renee,
yes,
my
sir.
bad. I didn't mean to get folks in the chat asking where you are. I just want to clarify.
No,
I was given permission to ask my questions.
I actually think that was more because I'm always on the go somewhere.
I'm just playing.
But
I have permission.
Lara, just so you know, I just wrote down, we're not going to do this shit without antagonism, without being antagonistic. And can I just tell you, I got to figure out a way to put it on a shirt or something, like just like be antagonistic, like that, like that's it, like be antagonistic, because it has to happen. And so I'm steady now, and I want to give people some additional context to kind of how we got here, which is, as everyone knows, one of my favorite sweatshirts is one that's very like colorful with the stars and the rainbows. But when you actually stop to look at what the shirt says, it says Israel is a settler colony. And so what happens is people get deceptively like excited by like the colors and the design, and then they read the words, and I can often see people in like that split second thinking to themselves like, wait a minute, do I what did I just read? And I wear that sweatshirt all the time. Like I'm walking the dog in this sweatshirt, I'm supermarket shopping in this sweatshirt, like I wear it all the time because fuck everybody, like at this point, right? Like I really just don't care if you take issue with the very real reality that Israel is a settler fucking colony, period, right? But I benefit in some ways because I am also 5'11", and I am not a skinny 5'11". And so I think even some people who may look and for a split second think to themselves like, what is she wearing? they also think twice about whether or not they're going to say something to the Amazon black woman wearing the shirt that they are offended by. And I'm also okay with that, because I would prefer not to have to punch you in the face in Whole Foods, right? Like, that's my preference.
Renee
But
giving out 2 pieces of biscuit.
listen, I try. Look, I've gotten so much more angrier about people's willingness to dismiss the death of other people simply because it's not them dying, right? Like, this willingness to just like be like, like, that's not us, right? Like, I can't do it. I don't have it in me. I can't, and I'm not going to do it, right? But I wanted to read to you. So as I was reading the book, and I came across these words, and I was like, this is fucking it. She just described me. This is why Lara was like, you have to talk to my friend. So in your section on exigent sadism and the touching of wounds, you're talking about the fact that, like, I can't predict what's going to happen when I go out in my sweatshirt, but I choose to do it anyway. And you say, instead, she steps into the fray with the other's marginal authorization, limit consent, and takes the leap because she believes that it is worthwhile to put oneself at risk for the sake of experience. And I was like, fuck me, this is it, right? Like, this is it. And like, it's literally that. And I'm willing to engage with the person who, and it's happened every now and again, like, somebody will be like, oh, that's a nice, they whisper, like, that's a nice sweatshirt. And I'm like, or if I'm wearing my keffiyeh, like, keffiyeh is beautiful. If I'm wearing my Palestine shirt, like, oh, like, that's a cool sweatshirt. And like, I'll engage with people and say, like, do you want to know where I got it? Right? Because often I'm the only one in the room, right? And and it's intention. I want people to be reminded that this shit is happening, right? And in some ways, every now and again, somebody will be like, you don't talk nearly as much about, like, Haiti or the Sudan or what's happening in the Congo as you do in Palestine. And it's probably a fair critique, right? Because there's definitely, we do talk about it, but definitely not at the extent. And I think for me, it's not that one struggle is more important than the other. It is almost the caucasity in which Israel is pursuing their outright domination in front of the world, while our media pretends it's not happening, even though everyone can see it's fucking happening. Right? That has me incensed, right? And they have managed in some way, like, it's different, like, I know some of the things that have happened in Haiti because I pursue that knowledge, I pursue the knowledge. I'm trying to watch and read the things, but we don't get a lot of people in Haiti sending out. It's not an onslaught of what's happening there. And there's definitely means to do it, and we do try. In fact, Jared, I didn't let you know, I reached back out to Mahi for her to come back and talk about the Sudan. She's still working on her dissertation, but and we'll bring folks back because we want to keep these conversations going. But for me, I think it's literally the caucasity of, we are dominant. We're allowed to be dominant. It doesn't matter what the indigenous people of this land think. We're going to steal the land. Now we have Palestinians, like, appearing on planes in South Africa. Like, the wildness of this situation is one in which I can't ignore it. I can't not make sure that everyone is fully aware of what is happening every time I step my foot out the door. And it is definitely exigent sadism. Like, I'm here for it. Like, fuck everybody. I'm here for it. So that was a long explanation so people understand kind of like how we ended up in this space. And my real question, and this is for both of you, and it's in part feeding off of what Jared was talking about, like, as people are struggling with this idea of fighting this battle, right? Because it's being brave is fucking hard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I never want to dismiss people's real fear of the consequences of making the decisions that you make every day with regard to being antagonistic to the state, right? Because it is not an easy feat. And Lara and I have talked offline, so she knows a lot of, Jared knows a lot of it. So, I am living through the consequences of those decisions currently, as Lara is living through the consequences of those decisions, currently. And so can we talk about how we encourage, support, and engage people with this idea that it is okay to be brave and it is okay to be an exigent sadist? Like, it's okay to be antagonistic to the state, and there are ways to do it that, maybe you can navigate the state's response to it, but at the same time, maybe at some point we have to be willing to say fuck the state and we're just going to be antagonistic. And I don't know if I actually asked the question. I'm hoping you all are following what I'm saying, and then I'll let you all take over.
Mm-hmm. Lara, do you want to go first? Okay. I'm very grateful that you're bringing this back to the question of risk, because I would say that there's no way to convince people that it's okay, because it's not going to be okay, because these risks come with very real costs. These costs are differentially distributed depending on your positionality, depending on kind of like your racial vulnerability, your class vulnerability, no question about that. But I think being courageous is not about being courageous and trusting that things will work out in the end. It's knowing that you're stepping into a true risk. And for me, that is part and parcel with thinking about exigent sadism. Exigent sadism is not a guarantee that if you are antagonistic to the state or to power, eventually things will work out. It is precisely stepping into the fray of things will not work out. That when you wear your t-shirt and you force somebody to contend with what is actually on the t-shirt and what it means. I was traveling last week and I was wearing my kufiya, and some people were saying to me, "Oh, that's such a nice scarf." And my response was like, "Free Palestine. This is not just a scarf," right? But I'm a white, straight passing person. I don't have the same vulnerability as you might have when you wear your t-shirt. But both of us, despite that differential vulnerability, have to step into the fray, knowing that something might go wrong. And it's not going to go wrong the same way or to the same degree for each of us. But both of us have to be willing to risk it. I mean, have to is is a big phrase, but I really do believe in it, that if you're thinking of sadism as an ethical stance, then it's going to cost you. Sadism is going to cost you. So rather than taking the risk, but it being a kind of theoretical risk where you take the risk, but ultimately it pays off, we have to be willing to understand that taking these risks come with costs, and that when these costs are being paid, then we have to gather around the people who are paying them and support them. That nobody should be paying these costs on their own, even though, for example, like I know a lot about Lara's situation with Stand With Us and with how she was treated from within the psychoanalytic profession. People can rally around you, and you still have to go through it to some degree on your own. It doesn't matter how much support you are. At the end of the day, you also go through some things on your own. And yet, having people around you, having people who are also willing to take risks at around the same thing that you have taken risks about, or speaking up and taking the risk of speaking up, even what they endanger is not at the same level of what you have endangered, is, I think, the only way, at least for me, in which we can think about what it means to have the courage to take these risks, to know that for every bridge you burn, and I am very much for burning bridges, I think we have to let go of the idea that we can preserve relationships with those that harm us, with those that harm our comrades, with those whose projects are damaging to our world. For every bridge you burn, there's the possibilities of other bridges coming up. And this is one thing that I learned from Lara and watching Lara go through this in our field, is that for every bridge you burn, other possibilities open up, and that there's a particular way of thinking about solidarity in that, which does not mean that you suffer it in the same way. You know, we have to be able to think of solidarity with and accommodating the fact that there are differences between us, and we're not all going to pay the same price. But especially those of us who have more privilege. I'm queer myself. I'm an immigrant. English is not my first language, but I'm white. I am well educated. For the most part, middle class. So in many ways, like, I have to be willing to take those risks, and not just to put myself on the line, and without being willing to put ourselves on the line for our comrades. This isn't kind of like the solidarity of sending emails privately or saying, oh, I'm so sorry it happened to you. No, like, this all needs to be in public. It's not a political statement unless it's done in public. And I've learned so much from you, Lara, watching you go through that, and also watching how quickly power reconstitutes itself. So I'll say one more thing about kind of like wearing that T-shirt, going out in the world, and going back to Cyprus for a moment, where we see right now Cyprus is being bought up by Israel. Like, Israelis are going in, buying a lot of land also in the occupied territories. Netanyahu is beginning to say things like, we have to help Cyprus liberate itself from the occupation. And the truth is that we as Cypriots don't want Netanyahu's help. We don't want the empire's help to come in and save us from anything. We will do our own struggles. We do not want to be in bed with imperial power. And that is just something, and that is for sure a kind of seduction. Like, we will come in and save you. We will come in and give you the support or lend you the backing of power. And it's like, no, like, these are not things we have to agree to. And solidarity means not buying into the lie that it is that empire cares about any of us. Empire cares for itself. So I just wanted to say this about Cyprus. Like, Cyprus doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think it's a really important, right now Cyprus was the place through which there was refueling for planes going into Gaza and bombing. A lot of boots were on the ground in Cyprus to help support the genocide. A lot of the surveillance was happening through Cyprus, through basically the British bases on Cyprus. So I think that this is all very connected and really important.
I just want to quickly tack on that you just got yourself invited back. Now we have like a whole other conversation. And you were already technically on the list, because I know, like, we're going to run out of time at the end of this, and I'm going to be like, oh, we have to bring you both back. But now we also have to have this conversation on Cyprus, because this is people in the chat were saying that Israel was buying up land in Cyprus, and they were, these like private facilities that are being built, which makes me think of Lara's home state and how they're building walls in Lebanon. Like, they're all, this is what I mean by the fucking caucasity of it all, right? Like, the willingness to pretend as if your empire is so necessary and valid and needed that you can just go wherever the fuck you want and do whatever you want and be damned with the people who already are there. And I just, oof. But yes, you will keep getting emails from me, but thank you.
I want to hear that conversation about Cyprus. And can I just say, fuck the British Empire, fuck the British. Literally every problem we have, it's because of them. But also to think about, to go back, I'm saying that both tongue in cheek because I just like saying it, but also to remind us that there's a condition that was created by an empire that's expansionist, and its after effects, its reverberations are still here. And for us to call back that material reality and understand that for example, the partition of our lands, right? If you're talking about Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, all that is precisely because of the British colonialism and empire, and the continuation of that, certainly in Cyprus, also all the ways in which we can call back these patterned ways in which empire, colonialism, and settler colonialism work. helps steady us and keeps us clear about what the counterforce needs to be. And that, for me, is part of it. And you know, I think, Renee, to your question, sort of building off what Avgi said, is about the radical redistribution of responsibility. And that is a political project, right? To not be, you say, I'm usually the only one, to radically redistribute this in small and big ways. Sometimes I think we're really brought in to think we need to have these like huge, you know, grand gestures of things. But if we just watch the meltdowns that happen, right? I want us to pay attention to what it means to just refuse to disappear, to wear a kufi, to wear a Palestine shirt, to make certain that nobody gets the luxury of forgetting what's happening. And you are doing that conscious, like you just gave an example of what that means to redistribute responsibility. I don't think if we're up against a force that is so all-encompassing, that wants us to go back to what Avgi was saying before, that wants us all to believe that any one of us could be the target next, that it infiltrates our personal lives such that we make decisions that run counter to even our political commitments, then we can see that no action, no matter how small, is actually worthless, because it is us practicing what does it mean to show up and practice and make people have to contend with the reality of the world, that they don't get to not see a Palestinian flag. They don't get not to see or hear about this. It's that, for me, is where I've learned. That's the exigent sadist part, is like, I will make you have to do this. Now, some of us by our very presence end up being that. Like, I will not let you forget. But mostly for me, it's also, I will not let you be able to live in your innocence. That's the fucking problem that got us here to begin with. You don't get to bulldoze, right? Back to Jared, what you were saying, encampment of unhoused people, and not get to see what that fucking means for people on the ground and who is responsible for that violence. So I really want to sort of pull people in and say that the acts might feel small, but if we can think about this as a larger commitment to a revolutionary project of world building, then the ways in which we practice this stamina actually matter, right? And the idea that our actions are small or don't matter is also one way in which we're all atomized, that the state makes us feel like everything is ineffectual, that nothing is worth it, that we're disconnected. What's the point of you struggling for Palestine when you're over here, even though all the connections are right in front of us, seeing the surveillance machine, how ICE raids are connected to Palestine, and drone building, and all the drones that are over cities in the context of this settler colony are the same drones that are being used in Gaza. We don't have to reach very far, right? The last thing I want to say is that every revolution, I think Avgi in some ways was saying you act anyway, despite knowing that there are risks that are involved, and that's because it's a commitment to revolutionary project. I want to bring us back and root us in Gaza. The revolutionaries, that is a risk. Tawafan al-Aqsa was a risk. It was a calculated risk, and it came at a point where every mode of trying other things had already been done. For people to think somehow that risk was not calculated. Now, the intensity of the genocide, what the settler state could unleash and who would support it to the teeth, right? Maybe that was not seen. But to think that people on the ground are not making these calculations, and it's on us to say, okay, how do we make that viable? How do we make different forms of antagonism against the state to people fighting for their self-determination, for their liberation? I think that's the question upon us, because revolutionaries always have a different relationship with risk, and by the way, with life and death. Right? Like, I think we have to also come back to this. I'm not prescribing death on anybody, please, for any fucking haters that are going to come in on this. But I'm saying that the romanticization of this, that somehow we can act and not reconsider what this actually means for us to be engaged in an antagonistic relationship with the state, from the most revolutionary acts to an everyday practice of this, I think this is what, Avgi, you're really helping us think about the losses that are involved, because it's a fantasy to think that we don't reconfigure our relationship with the world when we are actually acting in this way. And it is in service of our political project, but it also is in alignment with people who make these calculations all the time, both the people who we look to in history that have helped us, but also people who are engaged in this right now. I mean, just sort of a shout out to all of our political prisoners in the United States right now, right? That make these risks every single day, these calculations.
Can I jump in for a moment here? Because I'm thinking of what you're saying, Lara, about how you act anyway. And part of how we are conditioned to think is that whatever you do, you also have to think of what are you risking, kind of like preserving yourself, guarding yourself, keeping people safe. And I'm beginning to develop like this idea that there's a kind of austerity logics through which we are told, trained, disciplined into understanding how things work, that we have to preserve things, that we have to make sure that we don't lose, that our families don't lose. And from that perspective, like taking a risk, like it's one thing to say one acts anyway. And another thing to think about, as you were saying, Lara, that you act and then you're willing to deal with what comes next, which doesn't mean that you welcome it or that you like it or that it's fair, which it isn't. So to me, the idea of a courage that comes without cost is a very dangerous idea, because it is a liberalization of how one might think about the risks that come with sadism, the risks that come with militancy. We have to understand that stepping into these spaces requires loss, and it requires risk. And start from there, and how to support each other when this happens, how to think about solidarity movements. There is a way in which we have almost been sold this idea that there's a way to do like revolution light, where you do something and it doesn't cost you. And I think that's what we're seeing. Like I was in Greece for the first time, that when I heard Greece has, I mean, there's a whole other history of like the neocolonization of Greece through the European Union, which is a whole other conversation, which really informs my thinking about kind of like how forces come in and take you up precisely under the rubric of safety, of protecting you, of making sure that your economy can survive. So as a result of which, at this point, I mean, this is a very kind of like quick reference. At this point, Greece is owned by the US, by China, by Germany, all under the auspices of being protected. So there is a kind of austerity logics that we have also been conditioned in, especially those of us who are trained as clinicians or who see people clinically, the idea of like, how do you preserve yourself? How do you not expose yourself to danger? Is a kind of austerity logic that relies on the notion that what matters most is not justice, it's not revolutionary politics, but how to stay safe, how to mind yourself and your family. And I'm thinking here of how J.D. Vance, for example, talks about what he calls the circle of love, where, of course, you would protect your own family first and then your own people first. And this idea that you protect your own first is exactly how we get into that kind of trouble when we're thinking of what happens here or what happens with people we are kind of like, I'm thinking of how Jewish people have really struggled with this question of like, do they break ties with Zionists, or are they too much alike to not risk that tie? So for me, breaking ties, what I have come to think of, borrowing on, leaning on Lara's work around militancy, of relational militancy, what it means to be relationally militant and to not allow oneself to be seduced into the notion that you keep relationships no matter what because you've had them for too long, that you don't put anything on the line because at the end of the day, that person is too old or too much thinking from another perspective, or they've been in your life for too long to expect anything different of them. These are the kinds of losses, not just the risk of going around as a Black woman, as you were saying, Rena, wearing a shirt that says Israel is a settler colony, but also the risk of our relationships. And I think that this all needs to be on the line if not on the chopping block.
I so appreciate that. And you know, somebody said it in the chat, like looking at this as austerity is, and it's also this Western idea of individualism, right? Like what you need
Totally.
is more important than anything else, right? And so if the thing that you deem to be important for you or your survival or your children, you know, whatever thing you're tacking it onto, that is more important than this general idea that there is an entire world of people who exist outside of your personal lives who should be considered as a factor in all of these decisions, right? Like every now and again I get a question of like, don't you worry about your son, don't you worry about like what's going to happen if something happens to you. And it's not that I disregard those things, it's not that I don't think of those things as a, you know, as a person, as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, like all those things. But at the same time, I cannot escape the idea that this world is not about me, right? Like I am very unimportant in the grand scheme of civilizations of people who should be allowed to just survive. Like, I don't even understand how we got to this place where, like, actually, let me not lie. I understand how we got to this place because people are fucking greedy. That's how we got to this place, right? But like the idea that people can't comprehend this very simple matter of everyone has humanity and the right to their humanity simply because they're a fucking human, right? Like that's it. You don't need to ask it. It doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what you provide. It doesn't matter what you bring to wherever you happen to be, like walking in the moment that somebody asked the question. Like none of that matters. You are alive and therefore you have a right to your humanity, period. There should be no other question outside of that. And you know, I can't escape that reality, right? Like once you accept that, like there's no escaping it. And I struggle consistently. I went to a 50th birthday party last night, and there was a part, and of course Lara will laugh, but of course I'm like in the dance room like sweating, and I was like, this my keffiyeh is making me hot, so I like wrapped it around my waist instead of my neck so that I wasn't like right. But like, who does that? Like my mother was like, you went on the dance floor wearing your keffiyeh. And I was like, I did, like you know. And I just want I want people to be willing to accept this idea that you yourself is one person, and whoever you consider to be in that circle of love, like this bullshit concept with, you know, like maybe that's not the most important thing. And that does not mean you don't love the people in that circle. It does not mean that you disregard their own humanity. It does not mean that you don't care about the survival of your family and your children. It means that you accept that all of that is part of a greater system of people and you know, and humanity. I just want people to be able to step outside of themselves and recognize that you are part of a larger structure here, right? And if you're not there, the larger structure still exists. So why are you more fucking important than the larger structure? Like, what is this thing, right? And so I don't mean to go on so much about it, but I just it's so hard. It's very hard for me as I struggle through this day-to-day life of like trying to balance being mom and being a friend and being a person who likes to eat and, you know, who likes to be outdoors and who likes to walk her dog and like all of these very normal things, but recognizing as all of those normal things are happening, there's a larger construct outside of myself that I simply cannot disregard. I'm incapable of disregarding it. And it, you know, it's really just that simple. And I want people to kind of join me on that journey, right? As much as possible. I don't know if anybody has anything to add. And we do have a couple of questions that we can try and get to before we have to close out this afternoon. So
Can I say something real quick about what you just said, Renee? Do we have time?
Oh yeah, of course.
I think that for me, this moment where you're asked, like, what about your son? Like, what about your kid? Like, are you not worried about them? To me, that feels like a very powerful example of what I mean by exigent sadism, because it brings to mind, like when we had the Palestine protests in colleges last year, kind of like flaring up. There was this Professor Willoughby Herard, a Black woman who was being ferried out by cops in military gear. And somebody, an interviewer, like a journalist, put a microphone in her face, and they said to her, "Aren't you afraid of losing your job?" And I think that there's something about interpolating you as a Black woman, interpolating her as a Black woman. Like, isn't your child already vulnerable as a Black child in this society? Isn't your job already precarious? And it has this, whether it's intended that way or not, I think that it has this know your place, kind of like racialized undercurrent in it. Like, do you really think you can afford to risk that much? Aren't you already too vulnerable? So there is a kind of interpolative move there to almost remind you of your place, that your place is not to be taking risks, but to be protecting your family, which of course is just tying you back in to this logic of precarity and of austerity. For me, this is a calling back into austerity logics. So I really appreciate you talking about austerity also in the context of capitalism, because somebody put a comment in the chat about the IMF, and austerity logics were actually very much run by the IMF, especially, like, I'm thinking about Greece, but of course not only, Argentina, like so many countries that have been tortured by the IMF. And this logic of accumulation, as opposed to spending down one's resources. What are we accumulating cultural capital for? If not to spend it down at a time of a genocide, at a time of crisis? What are we going to do with this capital? And I'm talking here not just about material capital, but also cultural capital, which, one way that I look at what Lara did around the kind of like going against settler colonialism, but especially after the genocide started, is to spend down her capital. And of course, you've accumulated other kinds of resources, Lara, through that, but you were willing to risk it, and you lost some of it. And that's just how it works. So I just wanted to draw our attention to the ways in which these questions are not innocent, and they're not ideologically entangled. Questions about, what about your safety? What about, aren't you afraid?
Jared, you unmuted. I have a tiny thing to say, but I want to.
No, I was just wanting to encourage you all to continue on, and just to say thank you, and to co-sign and all of that. And then, and just to that last comment, I mean, one, I think it is intentional. And then I also think it's also meant to convey an immaturity around the politics. Like, how could you be this irresponsible and immature with your status and your place? Again, you're right, know your place, and then fall back in line. But yeah, no, but that was it. All right, please go ahead. Yeah.
Right. And that professor's still paying for it, right? We know what's happening right now. But I love her response, if we remember it, where she was just like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, what the fuck's the point of my job if there aren't students? Like, it doesn't matter. So it's a bringing back. That's what I mean about like bringing people back to the material condition. That didn't change the question that was asked. And I wrote the same thing, Avgi, about these are not innocent questions, right? They bring us into a relational exchange on the premise that was already built for us. That question is a question that calls all of this into, brings all of this into light, and is meant to have associative processes engaged as well. And these associative processes are racial, they're gender, they're all these sorts of things, and they make us struggle within ourselves. So Renee, when you're like sort of talking about that, I think what I would say to folks is this is not meant to be like somehow we're going to get this right constantly. The force of this shit is so strong. We are going to fuck up. We're going to hesitate. We're going to fail to do these things. And I think rather than looking at that as individual failures, is for us to come back, just like that response of what the fuck's the point of my job if there are no students for it, is for us to say, what are the forces that are playing on us and through us that make this moment difficult to rise to the challenge to do this? And I think tracking that is a way that I think about psychic militancy as well, to be able to track the patterned ways in which these intrusions happen, in which we are demanded to act in certain ways, in which the wagers are made known to us. They're threats. The wagers are threats, folks. Like, the threat of losing your job is meant to stop you from engaging. They are actual threats. And so when we are stopped in our place, what is it that we're engaging in here? And the last thing that I'll say is, Renee, when you said it like that, you know, I think these are our conceptualizations for me of what abolition means. Like, it is about dismantling prisons and freeing all of our political prisoners, and understand that that is a political project that has to be part of all our revolutionary fights. And also, it's the ways in which we work against the carceral logics that are implanted in us together. So these questions of each other, of stopping up our revolutionary fire, of engaging with each other in ways that might feel protective, but in the end stabilize a carceral machine that expects not to be challenged, right? This is a tall order. I'm not saying this is easy to do, but to always recognize that the choices we're pulled into, that sometimes are impossible choices. I want to say this as well. Sometimes we are coerced into impossible choices. They follow a particular logic, and that logic is always to stabilize power. It's always to stabilize the state. And that's, for me, has given me a sort of way to think about, what does it mean? What action can destabilize that? What does it mean for me to divest from this forced upon relationship? That's the reconfiguration of the relationship, or withdrawing consent, is like, in the end, I withdraw my consent to be engaged in this way, in this coercive way. The last thing I want to say is, Avgi had talked about how she's learned from me. I want to say that to everybody listening, that the cultural and political capital is also one way that she has practiced. So when she says you have to lose shit, this is somebody who has publicly resigned from very prestigious places, who has denied awards, and consistently says, this is the part about solidarity, has said, it's because you treated Lara this way that I am withholding. She's one of the most revered people in our field, and people chase after her constantly and are lucky to have her teaching and sort of being in spaces, and they treat it like that. And her response to withdrawing herself from places is to put the cultural and political capital at place and be like, I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to show up in your space because I refuse to launder the fucking violence that you do. And I think I'm giving this as an example because there are we need to sort of hear about these things, about like, what does it actually look like in mechanics when we say we do this publicly, when we support each other publicly. The final thing is that there was somebody who asked me, like, what do we do to support our students to continue doing this? And I said, it's not our students who need the support. They fucking know what they're doing. What we need to do is make sure that we build a world that when they lose jobs, when they lose their degrees, that we are there to make sure they can still live. And that makes it such that with the loss is actually a concrete holding space for people so that they're better equipped to make these ethical choices, and it doesn't become an impossible choice.
Whew. Thank you both for that, and thank you for that, sharing that little bit of about your friend and comrade here. That's dope. That's very dope, because we hear again justifiably about a lot of the sucker scholars and ivory tower this is and that's, but I don't feel like we often hear enough about these stories either. And a lot of people do take certain stances and make sacrifices and are punished for it. So thank you both very much for that. And yeah, that was it, Renee. I just wanted to thank them for that.
All right.
In particular.
All right. So there's a couple of questions, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them. So I apologize, folks who asked the question. I'm trying to navigate like which ones I feel like quasi got answered. So This question from TL is, I wonder if either of the guests have come across Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and if so, did it inform their work in any way? Agreement, disagreement, insights? And I don't know if this is going to cause a longer answer than necessary, but I mean, we'll go for it. I might have to pull up and like watch from the windshield, but we can, as long as you will have time, we can go a little over. I don't know how everybody's time is looking.
Lara, do you want to take it?
You go.
Yeah.
I do know that work. It has not. I wouldn't say that I've been so influenced by it, and I can say more about why. But rather than that, I want to save my time to make another point about another piece of literature that comes out of and work that comes out of the Holocaust, and that is the piece, the book, This Way to the Gas Chamber, ladies and gentlemen, that is written by a Jewish man who is asked in the camps, who survives by means of being the person who is cleaning the train wagons and walking people to the gas chambers. And there is this moment, he says something, he survives the camps and he eventually kills himself by gassing himself 10 years later. So a really, really important book. And there's this moment where he talks about, he asks himself, what is it that makes people that know they're walking towards their death because they're going to be gassed actually stay in line? Why is it that people do not actually try to run or try to, I don't know, like attack a soldier? And of course, the obvious answer is because they're going to get shot, they're going to get killed. But his answer is a little bit different. He says, I think from his experience of watching this happen again and again and again, he says, I think it's because people hope that up until the last minute, they're going to be saved. And this line and this formulation has helped me so much to think about how hope is not always the thing that we think it is. It is actually what sometimes keeps us in check, keeps us in the line without risking anything, because it is very possible, of course, that one would be shot in the effort to escape or to, you're not going to escape the Nazi line. But there's also something about a Jewish man saying, I survived the camps, somebody who eventually does kill himself, right? And who says, I survived the camps. And what I've learned from that is that people, through hope, through a kind of hope that is not militant hope, this is not the kind of hope for revolutionary futures, it's a hope for one's own survival and only for oneself, actually toes the line and ends up walking to their own death. So I think there's also questions of dignity here. What does it mean to participate in your own process of being put to death? That liberals love to kind of like take that up and love to talk about hope up until the last minute. And here we see a really important example of how hope is actually dangerous, how hope can be counter-revolutionary. So that's my association to Viktor Frankl.
I got to shout out the late Steve Coakley. In the lectures I used to go to every week, he would say, hope is dope.
Mm-hmm.
It's
yeah. And you were explaining this, and I remember that I read this in the book, and you're talking, I think it's actually I think you're quoting someone else's work, but they're speaking to someone who also survived the Holocaust. And it says, she only told me not to expect a victim to always be innocent, because a victim too is a person. And I was like, fucking bars. Gee. By the way, you've been getting cussed out, Jared, because you're not hitting no buttons. You're not doing no bars. People are very upset with you because you're not on. I think
honestly, to be perfectly honest, I don't always know when, and how many times. And sometimes I feel like the conversation is too serious for it. I don't always know, so I sometimes I just err on the side of leaving it alone. But I'm not mad at him. I'm not
fair enough. But just so you both know, everyone in the chat
is like, it's time for the button. Hit
It's
the
a whole bunch of
button. Hit
bars.
the button.
But again, like I said, sometimes it just feels inappropriate. So I don't always
I
know. I don't always
look,
know. I
I
don't
I
always
hear
know.
that. All right, we'll do one more and then we'll close it out. So Stephen Pellissier says, is there a term for this political psychology, like political economy, which rejects the formulation psychology isolated from its political context? And I just felt like this was a question that deserved an answer.
Yeah. I mean, let's page Fanon here. He would call it sociogeny, right? So there are many terms, whether we call it decolonial or anti-colonial or liberation psychology. I mean, our Latin American psychology ancestors, Martin Barro and the rest, have thought through this. This is nothing new. And I think this is one of the things that psychology, as a counterinsurgent discipline that works hand in hand with the state, writes people out of history that have always rejected the split between the clinic and the streets, so to say, right? And we have so many people in history that do that. Frantz Fanon is center to my work, has an exact precise word, which is why I'm saying that, sociogeny, but also about the practice of disalienation. So he talks about the ways in which all these systems, what we've been talking about are all the ways in which we are coerced into alienation constantly. It's not by chance that he was a Marxist, that he has this analysis in Black Skin, White Mass. He immediately says, I'm a Marxist first, I'm a psychoanalyst second, right? These are like hand in hand with thinking through the ways in which capitalism and in his case, he was talking about colonialism, of course, in Algeria, saturates our everyday life. And therefore, to think that somehow we can theorize or practice a psychology that doesn't include the sociocultural matrix and political matrix that people are reared in, and that is the root of psychic suffering in our counterforce towards it, that's the question he calls upon us. I have a piece I'm working on about Hussein Bulhan, who's, in the 1980s was writing about Fanon's sort of, my reading of it is that he was kind of talking about an abolitionist register. This is in the 1980s. So here we are, this many years later, and there are people in our field that think they've discovered this, that this is just like colonizer 101. I see Fanon, therefore I invented. This is the first time somebody's seeing it, therefore this is when he comes onto the scene, right? But I think there are generations of people, and it's not by chance that it's people from the global south that are offering a psychic grammar, a psychoanalytic grammar to the ways in which the violences of the world saturate our internal lives and is constantly in dynamic process of being worked through. But most importantly, what are the ways in which colonized and oppressed peoples have always been defiant, who have always engaged in refusals, who have always engaged in resistance, and sort of taking to task psychology as a field that peddles in this, seeing people as hapless victims only. And this is, Avgi and I have a lot to say about the trauma industry for this reason, and the way that is constructed so that people remain atomized individuals, and it's completely cleaved from their own sense of meaning making, and certainly from the sociopolitical forces that ground us in material. Like, the point is to derail us from being able to see the material conditions that have very much to do with the ways in which we are psychically tortured, intruded upon, and made to join with the state. This is the carceral logics piece, the disciplining of ourselves and of others.
Right on. Thank you very much.
So you did mention it briefly, and just so folks know, I'm also that one that immediately supports my friends. So Lara let me know her book was available for pre-order, and mine is already ordered and just waiting for somebody to tell me it's ready to read. So before we close out, if you could both share like where folks can find you, how folks can follow up with the work and with all the things that you're teaching and sharing, and how to learn a little bit more on how to implement some of these strategies. And then we will definitely at some point circle back and have you all join us again.
Thanks, Renee. I'm going to give Avgi the last word. since it's the mainstay of today was her amazing theory. So I'll just say to folks, the book that Renee's talking about is coming out with Pluto Press in May 2026. It is available for pre-order. And it's called From the Clinic to the Street, Psychoanalysis for Revolutionary Futures, where I really expound on these ideas of psychic intrusions, but also psychic militancy. And it's a book for comrades. It's not a book for clinicians. I mean, I joke that there are psychoanalysts who will hate read this, which bring it on, but it's really for comrades and despecializing psychoanalysis. If there's anything that I have been disciplined into over the past 15 years and plus that I've been in the field, it's incumbent upon me. That's the ethical imperative, is to share that with folks and be like, hey, these are some of the thoughts. Let's sort of put that to use for our revolutionary futures. You can find me on Instagram at Psychoanalyst Activist, and a podcast coming soon called Psychic Militancy. So I'm so excited to have you all on the podcast and continue this ecosystem of leftist revolutionary thought.
Right on.
I want to second Lara's book. So many of us are just dying for it to come out and can't wait for it to be out. So please pre-order it. As for me, I have a book called Sexuality Beyond Consent, where I begin to flesh out the concept of exigent sadism. And I'm working on a new book that is only about sadisms and thinking about the political through that angle. I am on Instagram under Avgolis98, AVGOLIS98. And there is on my website, which is avgi.saketopoulou.com, I have a future talks page that I keep pretty updated. So sometimes you can check there and see if there's any talk that you're interested in and just tune in.
Can I say one last thing? A shout out to our comrade Jay at Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. So you can find me there all the time. Always love sharing space with Jay. And there's a playlist that he's made. And this Monday we'll be talking about Delta Force in the Imperial 80s. So
can I just tell you how much I am looking forward to this talk on Monday? I'm fucking giddy. I can't wait.
I just need for us to, I just need everybody to work with me around my schedule so I can be there in the live chat instead of in my classes. So if we could just get to that level of comradeship, I would appreciate it. I know Jared's in the chat, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. Let's sit down and talk about my spring schedule before you start scheduling these lives next semester. No, to both of you, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed the struggle. These last few days have been trying to catch up a little bit to your work and these concepts. I can't wait to dig in. I just want to confirm this, literally just pre-ordered, Lara, your book. And Avgi, I'm going to do the same in just a moment, getting back to the one, your book. I'm going to get caught up. It's going to be a slow motion, but it's going to happen. And Renee, again, thank you for making all this happen. Again, to those in the chat who are here live, always undefeated, thank you very much. And to those who will see and hear this later, to you, we also say peace. Only, of course, if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we will see you all next week with more. Oh, in just a minute, I'll be back at 6 o'clock. If anybody's got nothing to do, we got 6 o'clock Saturday Night Live right here on Black Liberation Media, and maybe some special guests. Otherwise, some silliness. It's not going to be nearly this deep. So don't have. So lower your expectations. And if you're around, come on through. But other than that, peace, everybody. Thank you so much. Only because I know you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. See you next week with more Saturday with Renee.